Our next guest is the founder of the Crisis Center and works hard to help kids change their lives for the better. Stay with us and meet her on this episode of Lakeshore Focus.
The Indiana University Northwest School of Business and Economics is the only public institution in the region to hold AACSB International accreditation. The program provides undergraduate business education with a balanced curricula based in leadership, teamwork, and technology. IUN serves both traditional and non-traditional commuter students in a diverse urban environment. Learn more at iun.edu/business.
Welcome again to Lakeshore Focus, a weekly show highlighting the key issues, important events, and interesting people in our region. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick. Young people all go through hard times in life, some harder than others. They may need a safe place to go or someone to talk to that believes they can change for the better. The Crisis Center in Gary's Miller Beach area is providing just that. Let's welcome Shirley Caylor, one of the founders and executive director of the Crisis Center. Welcome to the show, Shirley.
Thank you, Keith.
So you've been at this for quite a while working with kids, right?
I was one of the people that started the Crisis Center.
How many years ago was that?
It was 1971.
Okay, so you're going to make me do the math? Is that what you're doing?
Exactly, because
Okay.
I'm not going to subtract
So that's-
and come up with all those years.
That's 45 years ago.
It was
something
a long
like that.
time.
Okay.
I was very young.
So obviously, and still are, right? So, I mean, 45 years ago, in 1971, what caused you to create this center?
A young girl committed suicide. She was 17. She went into her family's garage, turned on the car, and the next morning they found her dead. And her cousin, who was also 17, came to a group of us and said, you know, if she'd had somebody to talk to, maybe she wouldn't have done this.
So why did the 17-year-old come to you?
He came to me and the pastor of a local church, Donald Capp. And we said, you know, let's think about what we could do. Let's start a crisis line. And we really had no idea what was involved in this. If some people remember the late 60s, early 1970s.
I actually do remember those times, Shirley, so.
Okay. We believed that we could do things. President Kennedy had called people to volunteer for their nation. Ask not what you can do for yourself, but what you can do for others. And we just believed it. And
you were young and foolish enough to jump into this, right?
And we jumped in.
So you started with just really a crisis phone line. Was that for kids just kind of in this area?
It was a local number, so yes, and it operated from 6 p.m. to midnight, all volunteers. And then we began getting calls from kids who had run away from home and had no place to go and were out on the streets. And we started looking for ways that we could respond to these kids. Today we're hearing about young people being trafficked. Well, the same thing was happening then.
It just was called something different, probably, right?
Once you're out there and you have to survive, you will do what you have to.
And so you started then a residential, place that you could take the kids into. What was the first place? Was it just a house or what?
It was a 3-story house, 667 Van Buren Street.
Okay. And Gary?
It was given to us for $1 by the Presbytery of Wabash Valley. And we started with volunteers, our phone line volunteers, and not much else.
And so through the time now, let's fast forward 45 years, you operate a fairly sizable center now. How many beds do you have there? How many kids can you hold?
We have an emergency shelter for 20 boys and girls, and we actually have more capacity than that, but we are looking to expand our license at some point. We could actually house 40.
So your crisis line also still exists today, right?
Still exists.
And it's a number that kids can call from all over the country, actually?
We are linked to the National Suicide Prevention Line. And so calls can come in from all over the country and may be directed to us, but primarily they're from the state of Indiana. We looked recently at where these calls were coming, and primarily it's Lake County, but also Porter County, St. Joe County, and southern Indiana.
Well, I actually heard on a show on National Public Radio the other day that Indiana, and this is not a proud statistic, Indiana is the #1 state in the country for suicide of teenagers. That's not a proud place to be.
Right.
So that's definitely continues to still be a huge problem for us. So, but you deal with more than suicide. You're just dealing with kids who are just really having a tough time, right? And have left home or are out on the streets.
And they've been pushed out. Get out of here. And we have parents who refuse to take them back. And we have the parents come in for counseling and we work through the issues. And they do return home. But often the animosity between parent and child has gotten to the point where they need to be separated and they need to figure out how they can improve their relationship.
Why have you stayed with this all these years?
Well, I believe that we can change the future. I think that when we change the future of a young person, we ultimately change it for all of us, because every relationship from that point on will be altered in some way by the changes that we have made in that young person and their family.
It's kind of that ripple effect of the
It's the
pebble
ripple.
in the pond. The ripples
Yeah.
go out. So, talk about one of those pebbles in the pond where the ripples changed, you think, for the better. Could you just talk about, you don't have to necessarily give the person's name, but, give us an example of one of these kids.
A young girl that came to us who had been kicked out of her home, who had a history of abuse, sexual abuse by a stepfather, and who arrived at our doors and was there for quite a period of time. There was no place for her to go, and no family member that would take her. She couldn't go back to her original household. While she was there, she finished high school. She managed to get a scholarship, went to college, and sent us a letter and said, I want you to know how you changed my life. I'm happily married. I finished my college education. I have young children, and I have a wonderful husband, and I'm creating the life for myself and for them that I didn't have.
Wow.
So
That's going to really feel good to get those, but you don't get those all the time, right?
we don't always get what happens next, although we do follow up for a year after a young person leaves. We call their parents to find out what's happened. And about 95% of the kids are back in school. And we figure that's a key indicator.
That's real, but it's always not success, right? I mean, there are the times it's just like, no matter what you do, that kid just can't seem to get it together, right?
Sometimes they can't get it together the first time they're with us and they come back. A couple...
You get a second shot.
We get a second shot.
Okay.
The older you are, I think 17-year-olds maybe have a little clue that they are going to grow up. At 13, sometimes you can't imagine ever being a grown-up.
So how many years in this were you really the primary person kind of dealing with everything before you started maybe having some staff you know, I know you always had volunteers, but you were probably the anchor, right? When did that start changing?
Start changing so that I was more of an administrator. Is that what you mean?
Right, where you weren't
Yeah.
the only one with hands-on.
Well, I think because I was the grant writer, and I was always doing the paperwork, and when we had the crisis line, operating the crisis lines too, and answering the phone. But I haven't done that for a long time.
Okay, so do you miss that direct contact?
I miss hearing the stories. I miss hearing how these lives have changed. So every month I ask my staff to provide me examples so I know what is happening in lives, not just in numbers, because what it comes down to is the lives of young people and their parents and their family, and the callers on our crisis line also, those people.
So one of the things we wanted to do on this show was talk about the impact that you've had in 45 years. I mean, because people make a difference in other people's lives. And so one of those pebbles we've brought on the show today, one of your other pebbles, okay? And we have in our studio with us today, GAVIN MARIANO, who's joining us. And GAVIN actually is one of these students, or one of these kids. You're not much of a kid anymore, GAVIN.
No.
So, but you were one of these kids that really kind of, the crisis center changed your life, right?
Absolutely. I mean, as I listen to Shirley talk about that history, it just reminds me that behind every organization, every agency, there's a story too. But behind every kid there is. And you're right. When I was a kid, when I was 17 years old, I used the crisis center services, the Safe Place program. You know, my family fell apart when I was about 10 years old, and we struggled quite a bit through poverty, through abuse and neglect, and
Gang
wow,
stuff,
gangs, absolutely, a lot of turmoil, to put it lightly. So, you know, Shirley mentioned something a moment ago. It caught my ear. You know, when kids are 17, they can kind of realize, wow, I've got to do something, and that was the age in which I decided to call the runaway switchboard, who led me to the Safe Place site, and ultimately to the alternative house.
What made you call that number?
Well, I remember being in the bathroom of my house, and I turned on the sink. Actually, it was an apartment. 'Cause we moved quite a bit. In fact, we often weren't in the same place more than 6 months. I turned on the sink. You know, my mother was really upset at the point, and both of my brothers were in jail even at that time. So things had fluctuated, but at that moment it was another low point. And honestly, when I was 17, I thought, I'm glad now, thinking back, that I had the maturity to think, if I don't do something now, my whole life may not be the same. You know, I may go down the same road as my brothers. So that was it. It was just almost an epiphany. It was just a moment
And
where...
you made the call, and then you went into the center, right?
And then I went to the center.
Do you remember this guy?
I sure do.
Okay, so what's your perception of, what do you remember about him? That was some time ago, not 45 years, but some time ago, right?
Yeah, just some time
Okay.
ago.
So what do you remember about this young man?
GAVIN was one of those young people that we immediately noticed, because he didn't want to improve his life. He wanted to do something. He was eager to get back in school. He wanted to finish his education. He had plans to go to college. So he had a vision of who he wanted to be. And so we wanted to help him do that.
And you don't always see that in the kids, right?
And have it so visible.
So what did that mean to you, to see him and say, this kid is a little different than the rest? He seems a little more motivated, a little more inspired. There's some real potential here. What were you thinking for him?
We were thinking of how we could support him in that. And one of our staff actually became a foster parent, so that when GAVIN left, after the period of time that he could be there, this staff person, as a foster parent, had GAVIN come and live with him. so that he could continue with his education, graduate from high school. And so he gave him the next step, the next lift.
And go off to college and become a great success, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, return to work for Shirley, which is another honor.
Which is really a cool thing. So did you feel when you were there that they're treating me any different than the rest of the kids? You know, they must think I'm really special. Or did you see them kind of treating you like all the rest of them?
I thought sometimes they thought I was annoying, which I know they really didn't. But, you know, Shirley mentioned all the things they did for me. And believe me, I sometimes felt like I was even at camp, something which I'd never experienced before either. You know, there were all these kids, and despite all of them having problems, we were all there sort of for the same purpose. So I really felt, wow, I've got to take advantage of this. You know, I would have long conversations with staff. I'd volunteer to with teen court even back then. I remember my colleague now, coordinator, said, well, why don't you volunteer for teen court? I'd spend extra time with my counselors. You know, our session would be up, and I wouldn't want to leave the room. And I really just thought, if I don't do this now, you know, perhaps I'll give up and give in and go back home. Not that that would have been a disaster either. My mom, fortunately, was getting counseling, but it really was that staff member that Shirley talked about who helped me, because if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have been able to go back to my school, East Chicago Central. And that was another goal of mine, to go back to school to prove to the folks there, the principal, the dean, the counselor, even my classmates, that I succeeded, and I was on the precipice of going to university, the first member of my family to ever do that.
Yeah. So how long have you been working there now?
I've been there now just about 14 years.
14 years. You got a long way to go to get to the 45 that Shirley's got in, right?
Yeah, it's so inspirational. I mean, and thinking about that moment when they started the center, whether it was a president's words or anyone else's words, can really make people do big things. And that's the message I deliver to young people when I talk to them now, by virtue of the positions I have at the Crisis Center. I certainly don't ask them to model me, because no kid is alike, but the possibility, it's there.
How many GAVINs do you have come through? First of all, what's the rough total of kids you've probably touched their lives over that 40-some year period?
Well, thousands. Last year, 345 different kids lived at alternative
Okay, those are
house.
just the residential. That's not even the phone calls,
That's
right?
not the phone calls, yeah.
So-
That's
so-
a lot of people. And when you think about the kids that have gone through our teen court, well over 200 kids every year are going through that program. The callers on the crisis line, the young people that go through our Safe Place sites or come through our Safely Home program.
So I know that you, Shirley, you consider each one of these kids who turns around in any way to a positive outcome as a success for you. But someone like Gavin, I mean, is kind of surpassed some of that. I mean, he went on to college. He's become a very important part. He's become a leader in our community. So how often do you see that you have a Gavin come along?
You know, I think probably much more than we realize. A year or so ago, a young woman came to present us with a book she had written. And she had been a resident of Alternative House. And she went on and was also a success and had written a book and wanted to present it with us and tell us how much she appreciated the intervention that she had and that had led her on to the rest of her life. So there's thousands of stories like that where people can look back and point to that moment.
When you look across the room at Shirley and you hear these kind of stories that you know have happened, I mean, how does that make you feel as part of this? Or
In good company. And you know, as Shirley alluded several times, there's, you know, sometimes no way to know. We may never know where they are, where they wound up. And nonetheless, you really have to have, you know, in social work and crisis intervention, it's more than just service delivery. It's faith and it's hope, truly, that you have to have for many of these kids and their families after they depart from our center. And I often think, I stare at my phone sometimes and I think at any moment, any day, some kid, just like the example Shirley mentioned, is going to call us. And they're going to be, you know, their life is going to be so profoundly different by virtue of what they experienced with us.
But Shirley, you have done more than just this. I mean, you involve yourself in a lot of things in the community. Why is that? I mean, I think you're seen as one of our key leaders in this region. So why do you continue to be involved in other kinds of things too?
Well, I believe in Northwest Indiana as a community, that it can benefit the people that live there, that it can change, and so I look to what it is and what it will become, and I want to be part of that. I really do believe in changing the future.
So when you hear that, how does that affect you in terms of your aspirations?
Well, it's certainly inspirational. You know, a lot of the opportunities I've had are because of Shirley and the Crisis Center, and they've inspired me not to just be an employee or to be a former resident, but really to make a wider impact, you know, broadly across this area, even back down to my old alma mater, IU Bloomington, where I always represent the Crisis Center. I talk about my story as often as I can, because you never quite know who's listening. You know, that's the other thing, and especially when you speak to young people, they may leave a meeting or a presentation and think, well, okay, we're done here, you know, enough with the boring lecture, but you may have effectively changed their life and not know.
So, Shirley, we're down to the last minute or so here. So, if there was a message to give to a broad cross-section of young people today, not just those who are troubled, but, you know, all these years, what would be that piece of advice that you would give them?
Believe in yourself, believe what you can do. Know that you never get to be a child twice. So if you can help someone now, do it.
So that's kind of your motto, because you've believed in yourself and you've believed that you could do something to make a difference. And you
Yes.
did. So you live your motto, right?
I make every daily effort.
Same question. Piece of advice generally to young people.
Work hard. You know, it wasn't a piece of cake despite all the vast resources and love and inspiration I had. It took a lot of introspection. It took a lot of work. And so for all those youth and their families, their fictive kin, foster parents, continue to work hard and don't give up.
That's great. Thank you both for being on the show, and you've done exactly what I hoped. We showed a leader in our community who's making a difference, and someone who's been impacted by that and who continues to carry that legacy forward. So thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Keith.
All right. For those of you who watch Lakeshore Focus regularly, you know that I end each show with a certain phrase: make a positive difference in our world today. During this month of March, you are meeting 4 extraordinary people who have made that positive difference. Today you met our second guest. Each one of us has the opportunity to make an impact, but there are some people whose breadth and depth of what they have done go beyond the average person. It is my hope that our interviews will inspire and motivate you to be a person who stretches past comfortable, reaches beyond your grasp, and explores a road that no one else is willing to travel. I have another favorite plaque on my office wall which talks about not quitting. Maybe there is something that you are ready to quit, but don't. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worse that you must not quit. We always appreciate your viewing of our show. For these next couple of weeks, I am going to make an appeal for you to send us an email. Not the usual notes on what you thought of the show, but that's okay too. What we want is this: we would like you to be part of a viewer group that would get regular emails from us about future shows, specifically ask for your ideas, and seek your feedback on topics and issues. Your responses might tie into the content of the show. Please email us today at focus@lakeshorepublicmedia.org. Write this address down now or you may forget it. Remember, you will be part of a special group of viewers and your input will be valuable to enriching this show. Don't forget that you can also visit our website where you can enjoy past Lakeshore Focus shows. Join us next week for another Lakeshore Focus. Until then, I'm Keith Kirkpatrick reminding you again to make a positive difference in our world today.
The Indiana University Northwest School of Business and Economics is the only public institution in the region to hold AACSB International Accreditation. The program provides undergraduate business education with a balanced curricula based in leadership, teamwork, and technology. IUN serves both traditional and non-traditional commuter students in a diverse urban environment. Learn more at iun.edu/business.